Hello, my name is Ajmal Mohmand, and my project is on climate change and invasive species. What we will look at in particular is the effect of climate change and the rate of invasion from non-native species. The article that I chose was Assessing the Effects of Climate Change on Aquatic Invasive Species by Frank J. Rahill and Julian D. Olden, and this was published in the Conservation Biology Journal. So what exactly are we looking at? We're looking at freshwater ecosystems and their rise in the temperature of the climate, also known as global warming. Humans have played a huge role in the spread of invasive species, such as releasing exotic pets into the wild or intentionally stocking them for fisheries and markets. But what is different this time is how the climate can play a role in the spread of invasive species. Climate change is expected to result in warmer water temperatures, shorter duration of ice cover, altered stream flow patterns, and increased salinization, which will all lead to a change in the way invasive species enter aquatic systems. The hypothesis of this study is that with an increase of temperature, there will be an increase in invasive species. What they tested in research were areas with altered thermal regimes, areas which had a reduction in ice cover, and areas that had increased salinity, and how climate change affected the rate of invasion of non-native species. The first area in which they researched were altered thermal regimes. So the effect of altered thermal regimes will increase in the likelihood of invasive species. This is because certain species cannot live under certain conditions. For example, a polar bear cannot live in subtropical Florida. So with the increase in temperature, certain species can expand their range and arrive upon areas that were previously uninhabited by their species. Next, what they looked at was a reduction of ice cover. With the reduction of ice, there is an increase of sunlight that reaches the aquatic plants, which in turn leads to a higher level of oxygen and more activity of aquatic life, especially during the winter months. This in turn can lead to a habitat with more resources for which an invasive species might prefer during periods of time like winter where resources are limited. The last aspect of climate change in which they targeted was the effects of increased salinity. What happens with an increase of salinity is that there is not as much precipitation and the environment results in being more arid and increased desiccation. This affects aquatic organisms because it can lead to a change of habitat to native fish and can lead to a more suitable environment of invasive species, which in turn would lead to increased competition for the native species. After the studies and observations were done, the conclusion that I felt is best and can be summed up into one sentence is, climate change may force a redefinition of invasive species. What this means is that we usually correlate invasive species with non-native, but with the increase in the temperature of the climate, the ranges of these non-native species are expanding, and for a lack of a better term, are not invading, but more of naturally re-establishing within their new range. The hypothesis of this experiment was correct in that an increase of temperature would lead to an increase of invasive species. Now what I want to look at was how will these native species respond from an evolutionary aspect? Will they simply die out? Or will they evolve and be able to outcompete the invaders via some sort of genetic mutation that becomes dominant after many generations? So that's what I really want to research. The way that I would carry out my research will be by first collecting samples of the native species in an environment where there are no invasive species at all. And then I will collect native species from an environment where there are invasive species present. I will then let them reproduce and document the offspring and observe for any mutations. So my hypothesis would be that they would co-evolve. So both the native and invasive species would evolve. The invasive species would better fit its new ecosystem and habitat, and the native species will evolve in the fact that they could better compete or defend from the invasive species. So my conclusion could be that my hypothesis was correct and coevolution occurs, or I could have a failed hypothesis where the native species doesn't evolve and eventually dies off because of competition. So why is all of this important? What's the broader impact? Well, it's important on our ecosystems. A perfect example of this is the northern snakehead, which destroyed local populations of fish and drastically affected the local fisheries and the economy of the Chesapeake Bay a few years ago. Also, another thing is, what if there's an invasive crop plant that hits the US? For example, corn or any other vegetable wouldn't be able to grow because of this new plant. And this would drastically affect our economies and food rates. Also, this is important because we need to prepare and research to prevent anything like this happening in the future. Another great aspect about this is that this creates a new field of evolutionary research on how the native species will evolve or adapt to a new species in their environment. I appreciate you all for listening to my video and have a great day. Thank you.